I have a 3-day weekend. Today is day 1. I'm hoping to just rock this out in 3 days, I'm hoping. And then I have to work a couple more days, and then we're taking off out of town again to go see my oldest son, Forrest. I am so close. We emptied out our first bucket of mud. We're gonna clean it out. We're gonna put finished mud in there. I'll be just ready to go with a wider knife.
While Ola's doing as much of the taping as she can reach, I'm going to go ahead and get this gearbox for the snowblower put together, mounted back on, and then get the snowblower out of the shop. That way we have room to get to the taping, and then I'm going to finish the compressor room. I want that room ready to go so that by the time we're done with the tape and mud on the drywall, we can get right into prime and paint for the whole shop. Ola's been moving right along pretty quickly with this tape and mud for all of the drywall. Some of these spots are a little bit tough to reach because the equipment is in the way and the scaffolds just won't quite stretch over them. We have pretty nice weather coming for the next several days, so that's why we thought if we could get this equipment out of the way, we could just take it outside and make plenty of room to get the scaffolds in to get the last few tape joints put together without having the obstructions in the way. As I work on some of this equipment here in the shop, I find myself getting pretty anxious to get started moving tools and shop equipment into the shop and getting things in place and set up the way that I want them for the shop. I keep thinking, oh, I should just bring the shop air compressor inside and get it in here. Oh, I should bring my toolbox in here to get the tools inside where it's easy to get to them. At this point, I know where I'll have some workbenches, some freestanding shelves, and things like broom and shovel hangers. But I have to remind myself, everything that I bring in at this point will be in the way for paint, and that means that it has to get taped off, masked off, or taken out again to get through the painting and the finishing stages. And I don't want to have to deal with that. So I just have to remind myself to be patient and wait for that moment. It sure is exciting though.
This is where I feel like the finish line is coming. We talked about how we're going to possibly do the wood paneling. Mark is wanting to try to put a little bit of wood glue in the finish of mud and smooth out the walls. So when we paint them, the yellow won't come through the paint and it'll all just be white. When Mark would do our custom shelvings in our previous builds and stuff like that, he would always, smooth it out with either like the fine wood, it's like wood mud or mud, and it always turned out really good. I thought the most challenging mudding is working between the garage door things, all the things, they're just in the way. When I'm moving my knife work, I can't move my full arm, and I'm working that mud way too much than I need to. So I feel like I'm gonna have to sand more than I want to. I've already sanded a little bit. Honestly, the way I like to put my mud on is if there is like a little high ridge, I'll leave it instead of like knifing it, and maybe making an error. So if there is just a small little ridge, I rather just with the sander than to knife it, But I try to keep a really, really clean mud work in the first place, so I don't have to sand that much.
I know it may seem like this is a lot of effort to go through for just a shop, but really there's not that much more cost in putting in this mud and tape. And it's such a nice completion to the project to have it just finished out versus leaving it partially finished or just fire taped. And the other consideration is the maintenance and upkeep of the building. When you're working in a shop space that involves mechanicking and or welding and or other types of projects like that, it doesn't take very much time for a good layer of soot and dirt to start building up on the walls and the ceiling. And as those of you that have done it can attest, there's nothing worse than trying to wipe that soot off of the paper surface of unfinished drywall, or that of unfinished plywood. With the walls and ceiling fully finished, primed, and painted with a high-quality exterior paint, these surfaces will be easy to wipe down and clean, which brings me to the second point about the plywood bang walls. This is not high-quality plywood. This is 5-layer CDX plywood that's just general construction grade. It doesn't have the greatest finish, and it's not that smooth. Putting a little bit of a skim coat over that will help take out some of the grooves and knot holes, which is where the dirt and the soot are going to collect and be difficult to scrub out. So if we float it out a little bit and then prime and paint it, those grooves and knot holes will be much less and a lot easier to clean.
When you start putting this joint rail together, like, see how that looks? That's clean, that's barely any sanding. All of it's like that. It's going on real smooth, so I'm like,
the joints look amazing. You're doing a great job with the knife work because there's no ridges to speak of.
Really astonishes me. You go like this, big old screws and gaps and things to a smooth wall. That to me is like, that's what makes me happy about doing that. And like when I did those two, I was just like, now it's like a real wall. Like you sand the feathering and you sand it all down and put the finish mud on and you sand it all down and it looks all clean. It's like,
yeah,
it's really,
I mean, that looks great. I'm like, shoot, you're going to sand that tomorrow and you're going to be ready for finish mud on there, and that wall's going to be done.
the fireplace that was right down, trying to get into here and get I just have these last little bits to do.
Yeah.
Last little bits, and then that's it.
And now on to the gearbox. While she was skating around the room on scaffolds trying to finish up the tape joints, I was down here getting ready to get this gearbox back together. The gear oil inside the case was pretty old, and that usually makes it really nasty and stinky, and it was full of little filings from the wear on the chain and the wear on the sprockets. So before I got too heavy into reinstalling things, I wanted to make sure and give it a good thorough cleaning inside and out, and that's just kind of a messy job. I don't have any kind of a parts cleaner set up here in the shop yet. So one of the old tricks I learned a long time ago in a maintenance shop was to use a piece of cardboard. It does a pretty good job of soaking up the grease and oil that comes out of things, as well as the solvents and cleaners. It just gives it a landing spot and soaks some of the liquid out. Then it's real easy to fold up the cardboard afterward and throw it all away. It's not spotless, but it sure takes a lot of the mess out of the equation. Once I was able to get the gearbox all cleaned out, I made sure to rinse all the glitter filings out of the nooks and crannies inside before moving on to cleaning up the rest of the interior components. I wanted to make sure and wash down the chain real good, flush it through so that there wasn't any filings in the rollers or in between the links, and then take a minute to clean up the bearing pillow blocks, clean up the bearings themselves, the shaft, the sprocket, etc. That way everything was clean and free of the old oil as well as any filings that may have been in there. Then when I reassemble it, I'm going to kind of pre-lubricate everything so that it's not going together dry before the oil gets to it. It's not a big deal with this since it's a slow speed rotation, but I'd rather do that extra measure to make sure that it's going to start up lubricated versus starting up dry when I go to start it next time. And then, of course, I took a minute to wipe down my tools with that same solvent to get all the gear oil residue off of there, because that just tracks onto everything. to help thread this chain down through the gearbox, keep it in place, and be able to pull it up through to link it together. I had tied a little bit of survey string to the end of the links and put a weight on the end of it. With the tight tolerances inside this gearbox, that definitely made life a lot easier for me to get this chain into place and connect it up. The only thing left to do inside now was to make sure that the tension would come up appropriately and not making it too tight, since it is just a rub block, but tight enough that it wouldn't slap around inside the gearbox. With it all assembled, I spray a little bit of penetrating oil in there on everything to kind of pre-lubricate it and get down into it prior to pouring the oil into the gearbox from the top. This silicone-based RTV gasket maker requires an hour worth of cure time at finger tight in order for it to set enough to form the gasket. If you put it on and bolt it down too tight, too fast, it will just ooze everything out and it won't work. As I reassembled this gearbox, I can't help but think about the repairs that I've had to do on this machine this year. I also consider the fact that this thing was used pretty regularly during the winter months and sat last year, and I brought it home and immediately put it to work without doing much of anything other than a visual inspection and a quick greasing. I had to buy hydraulic hoses in order to extend the ones that were there to reach my couplings. I've also had to replace the only other 2 chains on this machine, as well as a whole bunch of shear bolts. This gearbox repair is actually quite inexpensive. The fact that I really only had to purchase a length of key stock, a quart of oil, and some cleaning solvent means that it's a pretty cheap repair. I think altogether my parts and materials was somewhere around $25 or $30. So when I consider all of that, yeah, sure, it's taken some time to go through these repairs when they break down, but this thing has been a lifesaver, and the cost of repairs relative to the value of the machine is outstanding.
Okay, so I got the gearbox all done and it's bolted back up. I made sure that when I got this onto the framework here, got it all bolted on. Then I took a minute to make sure that the main shaft aligned with that good, so that if it's off center at all, then it's going to put a lot of stress on this double chain coupling. Now I still have the PTO issue where the shear bolt coupling union is not 100% yet. It's bolted together, it'll work, it'll function. I'm going to keep that shaft entirely off, and that way when I go get the drive shaft components that I need, I can take that with me, match up parts. If I end up having to go into the driveline shop with it off, it'll give me maximum flexibility. When we tore down the gearbox, I found that the master link failed in the gearbox. The upper gear and the shaft were loose. One of the set screws in the bottom sprocket on the lower shaft had come out, and the other 2 were still in and a little bit loose. When I put everything back together, I cleaned and flushed everything out real good and thoroughly. And then when I put it all back together, as I put the gear set screws back in, I used green Loctite. It's going to lock those in and keep them from backing up and loosening with the chatter and vibration that happens from the spinning rotation and the impact of the snow and the ice in that impeller. And then if for any reason I have another failure, say a bearing goes out and I end up having to tear down these bearings and replace it, or anything like that, and have to tear that down, just a little bit of heat from a torch, even just a little propane torch, just a little bit of heat for a couple of seconds, and that set screw will come right out. We lucked out that the only thing that was worn was the keyway. Everything else tightened right up with a fresh keyway. I did not replace the chain because the chain was actually not stretched. It's not coming apart. The only thing that failed was the master link. There was excessive wear on the rub block, so the chain could have gotten a lot of slack, and that slack can actually make that master link come apart. Everything's good. It's all back together. So in the morning, we will get this picked up and taken out, make a little bit more room so it can get to these tape joints on the ceiling that are just a little bit tough with the equipment in the way.
As we first picked this thing up, we realized that we don't have the weight balanced very well, and the gearbox side is pretty heavy. That's going to make it pretty difficult to maneuver it appropriately to get it outside. So we shifted it back and found a better balance point. With the snowblower out of the way, we were able to shuffle a few things around, drag the Ranger out of the shop as well, and give Ola an open floor space to be able to work around. She went ahead and got started using the finish mud on some of the accessible joints while she was waiting for us to clear this space. Once I get everything out of the way so that she can get around easily and the boys can move her around in the shop where she needs to go, then I'm going to get started doing the air compressor room. I've got most of it done, but I need to do the interior walls and a little short wall underneath the stairs. I'm just using the same CDX construction grade plywood that I used on the outside to go on the interior walls as well. I plan to do a couple of sections of built-in shelving in that room so that I can use it for inventory supplies, things like aerosols, filters, fluids, things like that that I need for maintenance of the equipment that we have around here. The interior walls will get the same treatment as the rest of the walls outside do. They're going to get a skim coat and then prime and paint white. And I'll also do that with the built-in shelves so that everything is pretty smooth with a nice paint finish so it's easy to keep clean. And the white color that we put in there is just going to make everything brighter and easier to see with or without the lights on. Since we were both working pretty steadily at our own projects, I gave Everest a little bit of instruction and had him get started skim coating some of the plywood. It's not a difficult task, and it doesn't have to be 100% perfect. As I mentioned before, the intention of skim coating these walls is not to have perfectly smooth walls. It's simply to take out some of the grooves and knot holes and making it easier to keep the walls clean over time. So this was a good task that needed very little direction and could easily keep at his own pace, just making his way around the shop in between moving and helping out with the other tasks. Before moving into the back corner near the wood stove, Ola's trying to wrap up everything on the ceiling. We've had a fire going in that fireplace all day, and the chimney pipe is relatively hot, so she's just waiting for that fire to die down and the pipe to cool off.
You got one more screw. You got everything done, and you got one screw right there.
With the ceiling wrapped up, except for that one screw, there's no more putting it off. Now it's time to get in here near the chimney pipe and get the last final joints of the main shop completed. She's really looking forward to getting on to finish mud. That's one of her favorite parts because it starts to really take shape quickly, and she likes seeing the way that it comes out to a nice, smooth, completed finish. It's also just that much closer to prime and paint and having finished walls ready to move in.
Just regular video, Mom, so make as many jokes as you want. Like, what do you call a dehydrated wall?
What?
Drywall.
That's actually kind of dumb.
I know. That's the
You
point.
come up with that by yourself?
Yeah.
Okay. It's pretty silly.
This was the last productive day of work that we were able to get anything accomplished on the shop. The next few days were spent preparing the farm and making arrangements to be able to leave everything for a week while we went to go visit Forrest in Hawaii. We haven't seen him in nearly a year since he moved out to Hawaii in preparation of starting school this fall. The opportunity to go visit him just kind of fell together, and lucky for us, our good friends Heath and Cedar were willing to come over daily and check in on our animals and make sure that everything was in good shape. It was a great trip and really kind of helped recharge our batteries after this really long winter. We'll share some of the highlights from that trip in our next video. But for now, the compressor room walls are complete and everything is just one more step closer to prime and paint.